Good morning, or rather good afternoon. My name is Manish Wadhwa. I'm the founder of Humanity in Business. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. Really grateful, giving us an hour of your time. And it's very precious nowadays, and I hope you're not too zoomed out already this morning. Been hearing a lot about people being extremely zoomed out and fatigued with watching the screen all day long. So I was always battling between, do I do it in the morning, or is that too early, or afternoon, or night, or evening? So we decided on afternoon. So hopefully this will be worth your time for logging in today. So my name is Manish Wadhwa. I'm the founder of Humanity in Business. What is Humanity in Business? I've been doing Humanity in Business for the past 7 years, and we're really all about leadership and what is the kind of leadership that businesses need to lead in times of uncertainty. I've been passionate about leadership for a very, very long time, and my own personal story has been really running an IT events company for probably 10 years and realizing that there's a huge gap in leadership in businesses out there. And so Humanity in Business was born probably around 7 years ago to really look at setting the benchmark for what leadership really looks like. And it's so rare to find good leaders. So I'm really passionate about having that conversation, not just about who are the leaders, but what does it take to be a great leader and what do you have to do to be a great leader. I'm passionate about two things. One is, of course, leadership, but the other one's also about how can business and what kind of leaders do businesses need to play a bigger role in societal challenges and do more better for the world. So I've got two hats on. One of my hats is Humanity in Business. The other hat I wear is Communitier. And Communitier is basically a virtual platform that enables charities and corporations to collaborate with each other to create shared value where there's win-win for the charities in terms of their projects, and corporations can actually benefit from reporting on the social impact they're making on their community engagement objectives. So that's the two hats I wear. Today is we're very much working in collaboration with Communitier, and I want to thank my colleague Kata for helping us today and helping us facilitate today, but also thank you guys for tuning in. So in terms of this morning, leadership and uncertainty, why that? What is it about? So for me, in the last 3 months, it's been extremely disruptive, just like most businesses. As we know, there's been a huge issue around not knowing what's going to happen with the lockdown being lifted, and when we're going to get back to work, remote working. There's all sorts of challenging questions that have arisen in the last 3 or 4 months. And for me personally, I've been toying with the same issue because being an events business, our entire business has been disrupted. And so this is our first foray into online events, and really never have done this before. It's the first time. So again, apologies for any technical issues or any challenges that you might experience in the next 1 hour, because we literally haven't done this before. But nonetheless, I've got capable people here helping me out. So we've got Kieran here from Plushdown Studios who's given us a hand. So very grateful for his amazing space. So our business has been disrupted. So the issue of uncertainty is really massive for me. And knowing, what does my business model look like, because all our leadership development workshops also postponed. And also how does the hybrid look like? And also from a personal perspective, how do I deal with this uncertainty to know really how to plan the business, what needs to be done, how do I do it? And lots of questions there arising from me. And that's where it really triggered my thinking around maybe an event around this topic is probably the ideal time to actually do so. So hence the event now, and here we are today. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our first leadership expert, Ron Laurie, who's a bit of a legend. Ron Laurie's been around in the leadership development space for the last 20 odd years, worked with some large organizations such as in pharmaceuticals, in technology, in legal, and he's also done a lot of work with the not-for-profit sector around building their leadership capability. So welcome to the show, Ron. Thank you for joining us.
Lovely to be here, Manish. Nice to see you.
Awesome, great. So Ron's going to be sharing his perspective on the ability to thrive in times of instability, which is something which I'm really looking forward to, because I think if anything right now, it's almost like instability is the new norm, right, Ron? It's like, how do we deal with this whole new way of operating? So I guess I want to give it over to you to kind of share your perspective on what that looks like. So if you want to jump in, tell us a bit more about yourself and about your journey, and then, let's get into the conversation.
Yeah, terrific, excellent. So, yeah, thanks for inviting me on and being part of this, Manish. I guess when you kind of think about life and you think about its unfolding and how things sort of develop, I think we can all relate to the reality that throughout our life we're in constant change and transformation. And if we're not, you kind of like we're not green and growing, we're ripe and rotting. So I'm no different to anyone else. I mean, I'm just like everyone else in the sense that. But what might be sort of interesting to explore is how do we work with the change and transformation as it unfolds? And I don't want to get into the conversation by just sort of saying that, when we look at, all the institutions in our past 5, 10 years, and we look at them now and we think, what was once considered to be stable, unchanging, are now in states of instability. And so, I like to sort of think, well, if there is a kind of balance in anything, and a kind of balance in universe, in times of instability, where is the new stability? And I'm kind of wanting to explore with you that the fact is that perhaps the new stability is the ability to constantly thrive in times of instability. And so
Yep.
that's what I want
Powerful.
to kick off with
Yeah,
and have
absolutely.
a look at.
So do you want to share us a bit about your journey?
Well, my journey started in a completely different industry, but that industry was subjected to takeovers and acquisitions, wars of attrition, change and transformation. And, I kind of cut my teeth in leadership and management in real time. By running teams, by being part of large transformation projects, whether it be the implementation of technology or responding to market conditions. So I kind of refer to that as my kind of first half of my kind of career. And midway through that, about 23 years ago, I decided to sort of transition into consulting because what I had experienced, I kept on scratching my head and saying, surely there must be a better way. Surely there must be a better way to lead, a better way to manage, a better way to deal with change and transformation. So that got me really, really curious and interested in the humanities and psychology and philosophy and hermeneutics and behavioralism and systems theory, all that sort of deep inquiry as to looking for a different way, looking for perhaps a more effective way in which leaders can lead and manage. And
Yep.
so I kind of built my career on just, you know, exploring some of the research and looking for ways to apply that into real life circumstances in a leadership capacity.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Great. So
So
do you want to share a bit more about your thinking around instability? What's your perspective there? I'd love to share that.
well, this I kind of it goes on this sort of notion, Manish, that there is a balance of some sort. Whether we see it or not, I do believe there is a sort of balance. So the balance I'm kind of trying to sort of explore here is this: outside of us there seems to be all this instability, this uncertainty, this complexity, is the VUCA acronym: the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity. If that's happening outside of us, where might be the new stability? And so what I like to sort of look at is that perhaps the new stability and perhaps this time in which we're all experiencing is calling on us to look inside ourselves to find that stability in the time of instability. It's kind of like, I often sort of talk about, you remember that film Twister,
Yeah,
Manish?
yeah, I do.
Yeah. And there was a scene in Twister where they're in a car and they're going across this causeway,
Yep.
right? And they're in the middle of a tornado and they see a cow going in front of them. And they say, oh my God, there's a cow. And a few moments later, what they thought was another cow going right in front of them. And say, no, it wasn't another cow, it was the same cow. So what they were actually in at that point was a stability within the storm
Right.
and all these things going around them. right?
Right.
So what is apparently out there and causing chaos, perhaps there's a central point that we can find within ourselves that gives us that capacity to observe what's going on without being sucked into it and
Right.
being taken up by the uncertainty. Yeah.
Gotcha. So you're kind of looking at it's kind of having looking at yourself from an outside perspective. Is that what you mean, or?
Yeah, looking at yourself from an inside perspective and being
Right.
really aware of your core, aware of what you value, and aware of how you're valuing what you value.
Right.
So about shifting into understanding about ourselves and how we react to the external environment. I think is a very telling time, and a lot of people have had their buttons pushed by the fact is that they're sort of experiencing a lot of upheaval.
Yep.
Yeah.
Interesting. You want to share more, a bit more about that?
Yeah. Sure. Okay, so let's just start about that sort of area of the shifting and a little bit of exploration about how people are responding to it. Then I want to sort of look at, zooming in piece, kind of like zooming in to find out what one's core is, and then sort of zooming out, big picture, about what that tells us about who we are and where our kind of universal address is in that. So, like everyone, I guess everyone has seen what's happened, and you can look at the two dynamics of what's happening and how people respond to it. And the first area is when people look at the COVID-19 sort of situation, they're looking at it and they're seeing what's happening, and the physical contraction that people have been subjected to. And in that sort of physical contraction, their inner state has been revolving around one of fear and one of panic. And as a result of that, they tend to be more reactionary, which is then exhibiting in their behavior.
Right.
And they're actually making the situation worse for themselves by focusing on the fear and the panic associated with it. And in a sense, becoming the victim to
Yes.
the circumstance. Yeah. So
Yes.
that's kind of like one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is where someone may have a focus and they're looking at the fact that this, isolation has been an opportunity for them to stop, reflect, and reappraise what they're doing. So it's kind of an inner state of reflection and contemplating, and almost like a reframing of who they are and what they do and what it's all about. And as a result of that, there tends to be more of a response to the circumstance rather than a reaction to the circumstance.
Right.
And I know a lot of people who are taking their time to study more, to learn more about other things, and to begin to sort of reassess who they are. And so as a result of that, their behavior is more like an expansion
Right.
of possibilities rather than a retraction of physical being.
Right. So does this depend on the kind of person you are? Obviously, it is how you respond, but how? At what point? I mean, can we say that? What is the challenges? I think is reacting in the moment, isn't it? It's like something happens and it's almost like you got to respond right away versus wait. So
Yeah.
how do you overcome that?
Well, I think it boils down to something to do with the values of the individual, what they are valuing and how they are evaluating that. And I guess the reality is the whole world is made up of different perspectives. Different people have different ways of valuing things, and that's absolutely fine. You know, and so if you value panic, or if you value what the fear associated, if you're saying, well, what can I be worried about? Then you cannot valuing that. But if on the other hand you think, well, how can I make the most of this situation?
Right.
Then you're valuing something different. And the reality is that's a moment of choice,
Right.
a choice that one makes, which is inside yourself rather than outside yourself. And so there's a certain power in that, I think, They're recognizing that people have the power of choice in how they react or respond to the circumstances. But it depends on how they're valuing what's going on
Yeah,
or
interesting.
not valuing it.
So how in that moment in time, what determines if you have the ability to how you respond? What is that determinant that some people will jump out and lash and others won't? How do you? And guys, by the way, please jump in anytime. Questions, just put on the chat, and happy to throw in questions as we go. So this is the conversation. So go on. Sorry, Ron.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can. I mean, if you think about it like a pendulum, we can overvalue something or we can undervalue something. We kind of find ourselves swinging from one pole to the other, overvaluation of the situation or undervaluing of the situation.
Right.
And somewhere in between that overvaluation and undervaluation is a point, a central point where you make a choice or you recognize that you're making a choice to overvalue or undervalue. And I think the power is in recognizing your own response to the circumstance by becoming aware of how you value things over or under. And so your perspectives that you build out of that are really sort of central to what you do next.
Yeah, interesting.
In how you be. Yeah.
And so, how does this play out in the work? Can you give an example around in the work environment? How have you seen this play out so that we can make it a bit more real for executives?
Yeah, well, let's look at it from three perspectives. Let's look at it from the system, the behavior, and the recognition of others. So I can be a manager, I can be a leader, and I can look at the system and say the system needs some attention. I can overvalue the fact that I could focus on what needs attention, or I can undervalue, I could just ignore that the system needs attention, right? So I can sort of be persuaded in either way with regards to what's happening in the system, the processes. With regards to others, I can either undervalue the others or I can overvalue others.
Right.
And even my own perspective, I can either undervalue my perspective or I can overvalue my perspective. But somewhere, within the frame, there's a middle point where I am aware that I'm overvaluing and I'm aware that I'm undervaluing. So that begins to sort of speak to that point of core. If you are at core within yourself and you know what your triggers are, if you know what you're overvaluing and undervaluing, at least you're aware of it. But the reality is a lot of leaders, a lot of managers are not aware of what they're overvaluing or undervaluing. And that then tends to skew their perspective. And that perspective can then have ramifications down the track.
Interesting.
I'll give an example, a real life example. I had a conversation recently with someone who works in a DC environment, and they're a manager.
What is DC?
Distribution center.
Right. Okay.
Right, distribution center, national distribution center. They're a manager of teams, and the conversation they were having with one of the people that they had on their team about picking product to send out to stores, and the person who was picking the product wasn't aware of the ramifications of him or her not picking the right product. But once the team manager made him aware of not just about him, but the implication of others involved, and the implication of the system being sort of out of kilter because something was picked that shouldn't have been picked. The ramifications of that was that, there's a lot of things can happen right down the track, right down the line, that they are not aware of.
Right.
So the individual was kind of undervaluing the impact that they were having on the bigger system.
I see.
So what they made them aware of is the bigger impact that their actions could have.
Interesting. Right. And so that's in one system, but what about, for example, in a leadership situation, in a meeting, for example? I think a lot of challenges happen in a meeting kind of environment when you have a
Yeah,
team happening and conversations are going intense and everyone's got a
yeah,
point of view and somebody says something and there's reactions. How does that work? Or have you an
yeah.
example there of what that looks like?
Well, the whole world is made of perspectives,
Right.
and when we sort of look at any conflict that can happen in a workplace, it's not a human being having a conflict with another human being. It's not a at that sort of level. It's really a perspective that's having a conflict with another perspective.
Yeah.
And so what is really needed is that to be curious about what other people's perspectives are and to be able to work with that. There's a lady in the US called Dr. Thea Dawson who says that there's three elements to leadership in the 21st century. And she says the ability to seek other people's perspectives, the ability to take on other people's perspectives, and the ability to coordinate other people's perspectives.
Mm.
Now, those perspectives come out of what they are valuing or not valuing, what they're overvaluing or undervaluing,
Right.
that really forms their perspective. So, for leaders, what we are called to do is to expand our understanding of other people's perspectives in
Mm.
order for us to be able to better coordinate with those perspectives. And in that sort of sense, having some stability in what might be appearing to be unstable, because sometimes different people's perspectives can cause some instability.
Right.
But if you're aware of your own perspective and your own biases, and then you have to work with other people, then you're at least beginning to find some way of coming to a central point which is more stable.
Right. So really what as a leader's role you're talking about actually managing various perspectives and finding the middle ground that sort of takes in everyone's perspectives and then puts it together to then come up with something that then kind of, I guess, appeases or at least sits with everyone so that they can see that you've actually considered their perspectives. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's certainly, to be felt as if you're heard and your perspective has had a voice and it's been given some point of sort of understanding.
Yeah.
But it's not about a consensus. It's about managing and working with the multiple perspectives that
Right.
do exist,
Right.
and at least knowing that they exist and working with them rather than not being able to work with them at all because it's totally out with your awareness
Right.
and what's happening.
Understand. We got a question from one of the attendees. Yeah, what methods are used to help organizations become aware of where this breakdown in shared perspectives occur?
Well, there's a number of different things, and one of the sort of favorite sort of approaches I take is to understanding what's going on by the use of a methodology called formal axiology.
Yep.
It's not really widely known, but formal axiology is a way of understanding the over and undervaluation of people's perspectives. So, basic sort of structure of that is to highlight and bring out where the perspectives are, where the undervaluing and overvaluing is actually occurring. And then as a starting point, being able to flesh out and to broaden people's understanding of what's going on. So in some sense, it's about the leader having the capacity to work with increasing amounts of abstract stuff,
Yep.
which is people's perspectives. It's abstract, but it's reality. You got to deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And are there specific methods that you've come across that we can apply to deal with that?
Yeah, there is. Again, it's kind of like the domain of formal axiology. And there's an underlying sort of premise in formal axiology that sort of lies in it is the individual is more important than the action, and the action is more important than the system.
Right.
That's kind of like a sort of progression. If you look at many organizations, they might actually have that the other way around, where they say the system is more important than the actions, and the actions are more important than the individual.
Right.
So, so let's just sort of play with that a little bit in a real life example. Think about, I mean, what can't not but think about Donald Trump, for instance. When you think about him,
Yeah.
what sequence does he work in? Does he think that the economic system is more important than the individual's actions, and individual actions are more important than the core of an individual, who they are? I think that's probably
Yeah. What
where
he's
where
thinking.
where it comes from.
Yep.
Exactly. You could say that the opposite. He certainly wouldn't say that he is really intrinsically interested in everybody's different perspective, and which is more important than the things that they do, which is more important than the system. So, how people sort of put that sequence, or how people sort of think in what sequence has got an implication in how they perceive and how they're able to work with others.
Yeah. Interesting. And so, what then? How would you then suggest for leaders to navigate that? I mean, when you got all these, with so many people have particularly opposing perspectives as a leader, and others have a totally
Mm-hmm.
different view of how something should be done. And I think it's this way as a leader, but then they have another way. What's the way of
Yeah.
coming to that, middle ground, so to speak, or where in a way which doesn't and not antagonize, but you know what I'm saying, put the other person, if, kind of put him down in some way.
Well, as I say, the whole world is made of perspectives. Our ability to coordinate those perspectives
Correct.
is important.
Uh,
How do we work with all those diverse perspectives, and then have the capacity to make something out of those, and work with them, not disvaluing anyone or any of those perspectives, but including.
Inclusive.
Often said is transcending and including, and how that actually works, and that's a skill, that's an art.
Yeah.
And it's often the difference between an organization today being effective and not being effective, how well that they harness the potential of their people and work with the perspectives in the organizations, and so that they're all heard.
Yeah. Interesting. And is there any other examples you can share about leaders who are doing it right, who are actually done managing instability really well? I mean, what is their secret? What have they done really well? How do they do it? In some tips and of actual practical ways of leaders walking the talk.
So we've talked a lot about the kind of notion of zooming in and understanding your values, understanding what evaluation. Let's sort
Yeah.
of look at the other sort of side of the coin in this, and say, well, let's zoom out.
Yep.
Let's zoom out. So I think I just want to sort of touch on this in terms of the zooming out. We seem to have lost our capacity for awe and wonder.
Yes.
Yeah. And what I mean by that is that if you think maybe 200 years ago that you might have been in a village, and you might have been a farm in a village, or a process worker, whatever, in a village, and then you got wind of someone from some far distant place has brought news of an exotic new continent or an exotic new piece of land that you have found,
Yep.
right? And so you're just in this village, and you get captivated about what might that be. Where might that be? You kind of got the awe and wonder.
Yep.
I think we've lost the capacity for awe and wonder.
All right.
And I think the closest thing that we can actually sort of get to is if we look at the astronauts who go into space. Astronauts go into space, and they have given accounts of their transformational experience of looking back at planet Earth and just being in awe and wonder. There's been some research done that awe and wonder has links to psychological well-being and feelings of excitement, or feelings like there is an altruistic way of being. So this zooming out, or coming from your own perspective and expanding it, by understanding more of the picture. So I'd like to sort of when astronauts go into space, their perspective is completely changed. And what their perspective has then done is has expanded. Their perspective has expanded. Inside their head, it is expanded because what they're looking at. Now, my father used to say to me, Ron, being from Scotland, he said, once you've tasted bacon and eggs, you can never be satisfied with having porridge every morning.
Right.
Right? You get what I'm saying?
Yep.
Once you've experienced something which is richer, more flavorsome than you've ever experienced before, you can never shrink back to totally appreciating what you had. Another way of putting that is like if you put your hand into a jar of honey and you pull it out, of course, some of it will stick to you.
Right, of course.
So this notion of what the astronauts experienced was this awe and wonder. The concentric sphere which they were operating at was so large they could never shrink back once they'd had that perspective.
Yeah, right.
So today in the 21st, how do we do that? It'd be lovely if we're all like, if we can get on board with Elon Musk and and book our ticket, take a flight.
Yeah.
But there's ways of doing that here. Yeah. There's ways of doing that here. I'm a big advocate for virtual reality and programs and how virtual reality can actually shift your awareness.
Yep.
It can increase your perspective.
Yep.
There's one particular program which is called the overview effect, and that is your capacity to put on a headset and to actually zoom out to look at the planet.
Yep.
I particularly sort of do that. I make a habit of doing that at least 4 times a month.
Right.
To put on my virtual headset and just stand back and just look at the planet and just sort of contemplate and just sort of, be aware of what we're in.
Yep.
And that is my kind of, once you've seen that, or once you sort of appreciate that, you can't go back and live in a small time sort of headspace.
Agreed.
Yeah, so you've instantly you've instantly expanded your perspective.
Yep.
What that also does, Manish, it also creates the internal space for you to entertain more perspectives.
Right.
The fact that you've expanded your own internal space means you've made room for more perspectives.
Interesting.
And in an organization, for instance, your capacity to do that, as we've just talked about, is essential.
Yep.
So being able to do that, your consciousness, will be different.
Yeah, I hear
by
you.
exploring things from a large perspective.
And I think for me, my own perspective has been that, I've managed to look at my own problems and look at how insignificant they are compared to the bigger picture. And when I zoom out and look at, and I come from India, and so you can imagine the challenges India's facing with COVID, with 1.2 billion population there. And when I look at the challenges they're facing there, purely about survival and making ends meet, my level of perspective of my challenges have just melted away. And it's like, whatever problem I'm dealing with, it's not really a problem anymore. It's actually what's the bigger perspective on what's happening across the world in other places which are far less privileged than us. So that's really helped me. Thank you. That's really gold. Some question there we've got. Where do we bring it here? We've got a fair few questions. So with multiple different perspectives taken into account, how do you prevent this resulting in decision inertia, i.e. negotiating a consensus that all can accept?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, it's not about negotiating a consensus.
Right.
It is about understanding what the perspectives are and saying that that is one perspective of multiple perspectives. It's not trying to get to some equanimity or some flat ground and saying that we're all agreeing. It's agreeing that we all have different perspectives. It's agreeing that each perspective is valuable. It's looking for ways in which you can, almost like a big jigsaw puzzle, you can fit these perspectives together to make a bigger whole. And also the synergistic impact that happens when you take on a perspective that you hadn't had before, but you entertain it and look for ways in which that piece of the puzzle fits with the other pieces of puzzle. Right. So it's not about saying that one perspective is important. All perspectives are important. Someone once says that no one is that intelligent to be 100% wrong.
Yeah.
No one is that intelligent to be 100% wrong.
All right. Interesting.
So what is the truth that perspective brings that might actually be the difference between your product, your campaign being totally different? Bucky Fuller calls this sort of concept the trim tab. And what he means by that is, if you think of what a trim tab is a small part of our rudder. You think about an ocean liner, which is a huge big ocean liner has to turn. And so the trim tab is a small part of the rudder. That small thing has to turn first before the big rudder turns. Then the whole ship turns.
Right.
So that trim tab is a small thing. Is a small perspective shift, or entertaining a perspective that hadn't been, being entertained before. Is a difference between going in the right direction and the wrong direction.
Yeah, right.
Our capacity to work with multiple perspectives is so important.
Interesting. So please let us know if you want to add to that question as well. So in case that question wasn't fully answered. The other one is, how do you inspire awe and wonder with your team and expand their perspectives? Number one. Number two, how do you do this when there is the pressure of time to make a decision, change direction from the organization's status quo? So there are two questions there.
Right. Okay. So the first one, let's go with there. Look for ways in which you can expand your team's perspective outside of their own sort of domain in which they're working in. I think an interesting thing that's happened with COVID, and even before that, is the restriction, is the compression, and a realization that we are actually in a compression rather than an expansion mode at this point in time. The antidote to that is to begin to think outside. And if you think about it, as I sort of mentioned in a little bit about promo, the COVID, we have created an artificial reality that we think we are not part of nature.
Right. Correct.
The reality is we are part of nature. But we have been so connected to this reality that we've created that in some sort of arrogance that we are telling nature what to do. Well, you could, in one hand, sort of say that COVID-19 has actually kicked our butts.
Yeah.
and sort of recognize that we are part of nature, and nature has got more play in what we do than what we don't. So our capacity to answer the question, how do you do that? There was a number of different ways. You get them connected to virtual reality. One of the pieces I run is a simulation called We Are One World, where we get 120 people who run the world for a day. And they get the opportunity to, think about things from the largest possible perspective. And again, it goes to that notion, once you've given people the bacon and eggs, they can't go back to the porridge. Once you've given people an expanded awareness, you can't go back. Plato once said, by expanding the consciousness, they will see life differently.
Mm.
Your choices are fundamentally different from the perspective that you take. Your future is determined by the perspective you take at that level. So that's one way of doing it. The other way, which is a practical exercise, and if we've got time, I can go through a little bit of a guided meditation on how to do that, as a practical guide of what to do in a kind of real-time sort of circumstance. The other question, Manish?
Yeah, the other question: how do you do this when there is the pressure of time to make a decision or change direction from the status quo? So you got the pressures on, but how do you shift that?
Well, I think we would all be familiar with Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
That this sort of stuff is not urgent, but it is important.
Mm.
It is important to peel yourself away, and I think one of the things that COVID-19 has provided for us as some sort of benefit is the capacity for us to peel ourselves away from the urgency, from the time deadlines, from the structure, from the running on the mill.
Yep. Yep.
To peel yourself. If you are not peeling yourself away, then you will always get caught up in the urgent and important.
Yep.
You will have no control, and that again comes down to finding the stability. Your stability, you can go back into that environment once you've found a central point of stability, but there's no getting over the fact that we've got to find points in our life for quiet reflection about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and even to question your own values and what you're valuing.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I think the challenge is almost, I hear this a lot from my friends as well, and is taking that time to find that silence and finding that space to be able to recenter yourself and to look at a bigger perspectives. But if you're running from one thing to the other, there's almost no time to look at the big picture, is there? And that's where I think a lot of people get lost there, get stuck into the minutiae of every day to day.
Absolutely. If I can sort of relate to that sort of cow example, we begin to get tied up in the flotsam and jetsam of what's going around.
Yes.
We begin to be that cow in the storm that's getting thrown around, rather than the one who'd be in center and being able in some sort of masterful way to recognize what's going on and be able to coordinate what's going on. Right. It's kind of, it just has to happen. When I first got into leadership development 20 years ago, I used to talk about, finding a place for quiet mindfulness.
Yep.
It used to almost kick you out the door, because we don't have time for that, right?
Yep.
But there isn't one organization who's worthy who don't have a program which looks to develop mindfulness.
Mm.
Look at Google, for instance, and some large, Coles as an organization, for instance, who have purposefully implemented mindfulness training within their organization because they recognize the importance of it in terms of giving clarity to what is a decision that has to be made, rather than getting sucked into the drama.
Yeah, I know, and I've noticed. I did a mindful leadership event a couple of years ago, and some of the leaders who were in conversation there around using mindfulness as a leadership tool to improve productivity, incredible. And some of them, and this is where I think one of my favorite leaders, which is Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, actually diarizes 1 hour a day in his diary to do nothing, and it's locked in. So he just sits there and basically contemplates perspectives. And he sits there and thinks of stuff. And I think getting away from the day-to-day madness to actually have that bigger picture, you need space. Otherwise, without it, it's just constant next problem, and there's no time to have that space to think. And I think I myself personally have had my best ideas when I've stepped away from work and gone from work, or had a separate space to go and do my things. In fact, the shower, people talk about getting ideas in the shower. Even that 10 minutes of space, if you use it constructively, that is, can be quite powerful way to do it.
Do you want to share a practical exercise that people might be able to do when they're off the call, Manish?
Yeah, sure,
and I can also send this out as a kind of worksheet if anyone is interested in.
Yeah, sure.
So how it goes kind of like this, sitting on a chair, and then, bringing in and having in your mind, some concern, thought, conundrum, idea that you've been mulling over or brooding over. And sort of bringing that into you sitting quietly on a chair. And then to imagine that as a bubble begins to form around you.
Yep.
And in that bubble, you're sitting. And then to sort of in your imagination, feel the bubble beginning to lift you off the chair. And as you're kind of lifting off the chair in your mind's eye, look down and see the chair that you were sitting on. And as your bubble begins to flow up, begin to look at the room that you were sitting in. And then further up, begin to look at the roof of the building that you're in. And then drifting further up, begin to look at the suburb or the streets that your building is residing in. And then going further up, you begin to look down and you see the city in which that street is in. And then further up, you begin to look at the state, the shape of the state with the water around the edges as you go up. And then you go up and, for instance, you as high, you look down and you can see the outline of Australia. And then you go further up in your imagination and you begin to see the regional area and you begin to see the curvature of the earth. And then you come further up in your imagination and you begin to see the world as a sphere. And that sphere is the size of a basketball, and that basketball is on your lap.
Mm.
And then you're at that spot, and that basketball is there, and you're looking at the world the size of a basketball. And you just bring into your attention your concern, your thought, your conundrum, and what you are thinking of. And then ask yourself, what choice can I make? What action can I take in this moment that has the greatest net value? And net value is the experience that adds quality to my life and the largest number of others in the most compassionate and meaningful way.
Mm.
If you ask yourself that question with regards to your conundrum, your thought, your idea, and let that sort of sink in, I guarantee that your perspective on a solution is going to be fundamentally different than the one that you may be having if you were sitting at your desk with all you had in front of you was a piece of paper and you're trying to work it out.
Mm.
The mere fact of us being able to look at things outside ourselves. And as Robert Keegan, the Harvard psychologist, used to say, it is the capacity to objectify your subjectivity. And what he really meant by that is the capacity to see and understand and look at the thoughts in your head, because you are not your thoughts.
Mm.
They are only abstract mental concepts that run around your thoughts. You need to move yourself from those thoughts.
Yep.
In order for you to be able to see it from a different perspective. And that perspective can sometimes yield the answer that you're looking for. Now, obviously, you don't want to spend your time up in that space all the time, but stealing yourself away to do that is important.
Mm. Mm.
And you're not going to be living up in there, but the shift that you experience because you make a decision at that level of that concentric sphere is going to be different from the decision you made at a lower concentric sphere. And that can be a very powerful thing for a leader to do. It can be very powerful for anyone to do, to get that broader perspective.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I always battle with is, having that microscopic view versus the macro view. And one of the things that has really helped me with my own leadership capability is almost when I see a problem and really putting into context around the bigger problems that we face. And I've kind of made that a practice for me to do. It's almost like, how is this really gonna serve the wider team? Or is it just serving me? And one of the great leaders I followed, I think it was talking about servant leadership, who talked about, I think, the creator of that concept, and putting the needs of others before myself, which is always a bit hard to do since I have an agenda. But it's a challenging one because even in times of learning around that, it's almost the very thing that I need is the very thing I need to give away. But the mind doesn't not but being caught up in those thoughts doesn't allow me to think that way until I can break away from those thoughts to then look at that. It's actually, no, it's about us versus about me.
Yeah, it is. So it's about others. Yeah.
So any other questions, guys, from the group? We have 10 minutes to go, so I want to make sure that we cover any questions, comments, or even any of your experiences you'd like to share with us. Please do online. So in terms of, I guess, one other question I had, Ron, was around understanding at what point, it's perspective is really hard for people to change, and not just change, but get alignment on, and working with a team that, it might have their very perspectives, they have their own, we have our own, and like you said, we got to find that ground. I guess my question is, where do you, when teams are not seeing, or individuals are not sort of letting go of their perspective, so to speak, and are held on to it tight and with that belief system, what do you do then? Because there's just no give there. If you see what I mean?
Absolutely, and that's probably our biggest challenge. Let's sort of circle back and think about Donald Trump. Do you think Donald Trump is someone who has expansive perspectives? No,
probably not.
With all due respect, do you think the people who voted into power actually had broad perspectives?
Yeah, no, probably not.
Well, so what we could say is that find people on your team who have the broadest perspectives. Find people on your team who's sometimes described as the positive deviants. The people who are the ones who are thinking very positively, but they seem to be on the edge of thought because they're interested in philosophy, they're interested in psychology, they're interested in systems theory, they're interested in all these isms.
Right.
They're interested in more than what they see at 5 o'clock. I don't even watch commercial TV, but is their whole world informed by what they see at the 5 o'clock news?
Yeah.
I mean, if that is the case, their perspectives are pretty narrow. Right? And sometimes it's difficult to work with people with narrow perspectives. The most humane thing that we can possibly do as leaders is to give people the opportunity to expand their perspectives, to see outside themselves, first of all, would be great.
Yeah.
Then to see the other possibilities and the other points of view, the other ideas that are also circulating. That's important. And again, it goes back to that sort of sense of expansion again. Once you see things from a different perspective, you'll never go back to the original perspective. Yep. It will be informed by the new transcend and included perspective that you have now. Ralph Waldo Emerson, if anyone has a chance to look at one of his essays called Circles. Well, Ralph Waldo Emerson is someone who talked about the concentric spheres of our awareness. And the people who have the greater concentric spheres of awareness are the ones that you want on your team.
Yep.
They're the one who can bring a diverse perspective and marry that up with another diverse perspective that actually might be your new product offering that had never been thought of before. Those two things had never been put together. They've never been connected before, but that's the art of creativity, to put things together that have never been put together before. It creates a whole different opportunity.
Yeah, right.
And can you even let's circle back into the COVID-19. We've never been in this situation before.
No.
But there's people who are beginning to see the benefits of how this is reframing our whole way of being. We've never had to do that before. And this is a very vital time for creativity as well as, caution.
Yeah, I hear you. Another question comes from Brunto is around, more ideas on how we can break down that singular perspective when they're dominating it. So I think everyone's does
Yeah,
struggle with that. Is like, how do we actually
yeah.
find ways to break it down and get people to have that bigger perspective?
Challenge assumptions.
Right.
Challenge assumptions. The unquestioned assumption. The find the undeniable truth. The undeniable truth. And what I mean by that is that most people think that their opinion is real.
Right.
Their opinion is real, but it's not landing on truth. An example would be some people have the opinion that the earth is flat.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
do. Yeah. Yeah.
they do, right?
Yeah.
And they probably go to their deathbed thinking the earth is flat. Challenge their untested assumption. Give them facts, give them science, give them things that they cannot deny. Pull the rug away from under their unchallenged assumptions. Make them feel uncomfortable. Make them feel as though they don't know what they thought was certainty.
Yeah.
Plunge them into uncertainty so that they begin to feel uncomfortable. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So I'm all for challenging people in how they see things. I'm up for being challenged in how I see myself as well and how I see things constantly. But in a sense, that's where my sense of growth and excitement, my sense of awe and wonder comes from. Because my God, look at us. We, as Bucky Fuller used to say, we're all astronauts in a little spaceship called Earth.
Yep.
I mean, why are we here? What are we doing? I mean, is this it? Is there more possibilities? Is there more potentials that we can explore? Expand people's opportunities to think outside themselves, outside their team, outside their company, outside their bounds of isolation and narrow perspectives. So that's what I
Yeah.
would suggest.
Yeah, and I'm
Challenge
trying.
them.
I'm trying to explain that to my mom. Like, she's stuck in front of the TV all day long, and she's listening to news, right? So what is your
Yeah.
perspective going to be on everything? A number of deaths that are going up. So I can imagine a similar thing would happen in a team environment where you have this problem which is so pressing, and you can't think outside that problem, and look at the other
Yep.
stuff, facts that surround it, and potentially challenge some of those assumptions. It's chaos and it's mayhem and etc. etc. So
Yeah.
it's you're right. So it's almost that creating that. I love the idea of actually creating that uncertainty, because that's where the growth happens and the perspective shift happens.
Yes. It's about support and challenge. It's about challenging, not for the sake of just challenging and making them feel uncomfortable, but support in that challenge as well. Don't rug out from under them and then leave them there flying on the floor. But give them the alternative, or give them something that they had never quite thought of before.
Yeah.
And so as a leader, you need to be ahead of the game to work in this sort of space. You need to have broader perspective. You need to do your own thinking. You need to look at all the leadership and management books and not believe any of it. Not
Yep.
believe any of it. But if it agrees with your own common sense and your own reason, then believe it for a moment. And the moment it stops being useful, the moment it's been disproved, look for something else. But don't forget it. It will be enhanced by what you know now.
Yeah.
The first thing I enter into a workshop, and when I say, believe nothing I say. Believe nothing in this workshop manual. Believe nothing the organization tells you, unless it agrees with your own common sense and your own reason, because only then will you actually do something about it. Only then.
Yep.
And you will go on your own learning experience because you put it into practice, because you wanted to, because you believe in it, not because someone told you to. Ultimately, it's about taking responsibility for the realities, questioning everything, being eternally curious, and looking for things in which inspire you with awe and wonder.
Yeah, beautiful. Well said. Thank you. We're almost down to time now, guys. Any other questions before we kind of wrap up the morning or the afternoon? Let's have a look here. No, that's pretty much it. Okay, awesome. Guys, thank you so much for Ron. Really, really, really grateful for giving us your time. Thank you so much. It's been awesome and very inspiring to hear you. I'm really grateful for your time. We'll probably record the session as well and put it online as well, so you guys will have access to it. At the same time, please, guys, can you please share one nugget that you've learned today on LinkedIn or on social, and tag us on Humanity in Business so we can spread the word around some learnings, in particular of Ron and what you learned from the session today. And of course, we still have 7 more sessions to go, so we'd love to have more people join us. And hope you found the session today useful, and look forward to seeing you on Friday with, I think it's Alan Ryan, who's going to be from the Hargreaves Institute, sharing his perspective with us. But thanks again, Ron, for your time. Really grateful for that, and for your wisdom as well. Really grateful. Thanks a lot. And Kara, thanks for facilitating. Welcome. And Kieran as well. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.